So I want to go out and I want to shoot pinhole photography in the 4x5 format with Harman direct positive paper. I have this wooden pinhole camera that I've had for a long time, maybe 15 years or so, I don't know. It's been a long time since I built this, at least 10 years. And it's a nice little camera, very rugged, made of oak plywood. It has a built-in integral shutter. I was going to show you the shutter. It's a brass rod going through a sleeve, and it pulls this little piece of wood that rides in a track. Anyways, so I want to take this 4x5 camera out into the woods and take some photography with it. Now, Harman direct positive paper is slow. You know, an ISO of around 6 or 8 is the way I rate it. And pinhole cameras are slow. This is an F something or other, 275 I think, 285 pinhole camera. So I need a sturdy tripod, but keep in mind I'm carrying this whole video rig, and I don't want to have to carry the video rig and the camera and film holders and then a big tripod. It's just, you know, both hands are going to be taken up. I'll have to carry a backpack. I'll probably do that anyways. So what is my solution? Well, the solution that I've come up with is I'm not really using my Joby GorillaPod much, and I've taken the ball head off of it and I'm using it on the video thing. But I've decided that what I could do with this is I could put the pinhole camera on the ground. You know, 6 inches, 8 inches off the ground here, and I can level the camera by simply adjusting the legs, though, you know, how they work like that. I can level the camera out. So I'm going to be able to do some ground level pinhole photography, just less than a foot or so off the ground, which is an interesting perspective because that's not the perspective that humans see. So what I'm hoping to do then, hopefully tomorrow, which would be Wednesday in the northern hemisphere, is to take this camera, this tripod, in my little backpack with film holders loaded with Harman direct positive paper, a light meter, a little notebook for taking notes. Oh, that would be, I have this canvas, synthetic canvas, whatever holster, and you flip it up and you have a Rhodia pad for taking pinhole exposure, camera exposure notations. Well, good morning. It's Wednesday morning and I'm hoping to get out and take some pinhole photos today. Looking out the window here, it looks like a clear day. It was cold last night. We got a bunch of frost on the windshields here in Albuquerque. So I have four 4x5 sheet film holders, and I have them loaded up with Harman direct positive paper. I have this exposure system where I meter with my Gaussian Luna Pro meter. Its highest f-stop is f128, and so I meter the exposure at f128, and then I have to multiply it by this correction factor that I call the x value to get to the camera's f-stop of f280. Well, I have a new light meter. It's a Sekonic digital light meter, and I got it recently a few months ago. I want to kind of use both light meters today and try to see how this one's going to work for me. This older Gaussian has had to been repaired several times, and I expect its lifespan is limited. So getting a new meter means hopefully I'll be able to meter in the future. But this is a digital meter, not an analog scale, so you can't extrapolate your readings with a digital scale as easily. But the maximum f-stop on this new meter is only f90. So I've made a label with a new correction factor, x sub s, s for Sekonic. So instead of 4.79, it's 9.68. I'm going to be using the camera on its little tripod at near ground level. And you also might know that I have these viewing dots on the sides of the camera. Well, think about it for a moment. This camera is going to be close to the ground, and I'm not going to be able to easily view this sight line here from the bottom of the camera because the camera is going to be within a foot or so of on the ground. So thinking about it last night, what I decided I would use is a little handheld mirror. And so what I'm going to do, if this works out, is I can hold the mirror and I'll be able to view the sight line along the bottom line there, which defines the top edge of the picture. I'll be able to do that for both up and down ones and both angles. So I hope to be able to use that effectively to get an accurate composition while the camera is down at ground level. Okay, I think I have everything ready. Let me get some breakfast and we'll head on out here. Well, here I am. We're in the North Valley of Albuquerque. I'm actually standing underneath the Alameda Bridge. We're going to walk to the bike path and over to the edge of the river, and I think I'm going to cross over the old Alameda footbridge to the west side of the Rio Grande, where the sun should be hitting the trees pretty good, and we're going to see if we can find our first shot. Well, I'm going to try to see what I can do with this dead wood, this dead tree, as far as finding a composition for it. I need to get my little mirror so I can pre-visualize my shot, the composition. And I'm using this mirror to try to get an idea of where my sight line is going to be. Well, I did metering with both the older Gaussian meter and the newer Sekonic, and with calculating the exposure from the X factors, I got 34 seconds on the old meter and 39 seconds on the new meter. So I'm going to split the difference and do like 36 seconds, I think, and see what happens. Watch. Okay. I like to stay steady and not move when I'm standing close to the camera, because any movement of my hands or feet on the undergrowth could upset the camera and cause it to move slightly, and that would affect the exposure. So, all right, here's our first exposure. I think I'm going to use incident metering on this because, again, it looks like about the same reading. I'm going to give it 36 seconds. So get over here, try not to get my shadow too much into the image. And there we go. All right. The dark slide back in. All right. And this is the scene. It was this big old tree. Within the foreground is this fallen log. So those first two pictures we took are still on the east side of the Rio Grande. This is walking into this open space area. You're actually walking into the Rio Grande State Park. It's managed by the state. Anyways, we're going to head back just less than 75 yards probably, get to the old Alameda Bridge, which is a footbridge, cross over west across the Rio Grande to the west bank, and walk through the forest down there and see what kind of pictures we can take. And that's where we're going to go across to the other side. my exposure is going to be up in about 10 seconds. So the way I keep track of my film holders is when the exposure has not yet been made, I keep the silver side of the dark slide out. And when the exposure has been made, I flip it around when I put it back in and I have the dark side out. So dark, it means it's been exposed. Light means it has not been. So this one is going to be a 40-second exposure. It's going to be this rock here in the foreground with the water near at the boat landing. So pull out the dark slide. Slide back in. Now I've been metering for the highlights mainly. I meter the highlights and then I give it about a third stop more exposure so the highlights aren't neutral gray, but they're a little bit brighter than middle gray. So that's what I've been doing. So okay, let's go walk up the river and the trails, and I have, let's see, 3 more exposures maybe. So I'm interested in getting, of course my shadow is in the picture, but the leaves lit up in the foreground and then this big tumbleweed in the upper half of the picture. And so I'm using my little mirror to make sure that the upper edge of the image is still where the tumbleweeds are, not overshooting it. And then the bottom, I still get the leaves right there. So again, there was a disparity in the readings. It was about 38 seconds on one meter and about 28 or 29 on the other. So I'm going to do 34 seconds exposure time. Get out of the shadow of this picture. The thing about Pinhole is you have this pretty wide depth of field, depth of focus. You can focus close in whatever focus is on Pinhole. So here I'm going to try to get these logs in the foreground and the trees in the background. Well, I'm going to try to get a picture of these 2 trees, probably 2 parts of the same root system, coming up, and in the foreground some of the grasses. And my exposures are 34 seconds and 39 seconds on the 2 meters, so I'm going to go about 36 seconds for the exposure time. And this was metered, incident metering, near the tree. Well, we're down to our last shot, our 8th exposure, and maybe I'll try to head over here to the tree line and see if I can't get a shot of the Sandia Mountains in the background there. So I'm going to get a shot with the undergrowth along the edge of the river on the left side and the Sandias in the distance across the river on the right. All right, we are done. Well, this was a fun outing, and we're going to have to go home now. What the heck is that? Some big old round thing floating by. Anyways, I'm going to go home now and set up my processing for the paper. I'm going to have to do 4 batches of developing, 2 prints per batch in the rotary Jobo drum. So we'll be doing 4 batches of processing, and then later today we'll know our results. Well, we're back home now, and because I'm using a daylight tank, so I don't have to use my darkroom to process these prints in, so I could use the convenience of my kitchen. However, it's the day before Thanksgiving here in America, and there is a turkey thawing out in the sink, so I'm going to be doing the developing on my workbench here in the garage. And I'm going to just be pouring the wastewater into a container that I'll later on deal with. So I'm just going to be basically using the workbench here, and the garage is fairly warm in here. It's probably almost room temperature. So, well, we have some results here, and nobody said it was easy. You know, the grand irony of all this is I went out with not only the pinhole camera and the direct positive paper, but I went out with a video camera that actually shoots photos. So on a strictly theoretical basis, you know, we could have just taken digital photographs and called it done, but the whole exercise here is about, it's about the physical print, really. That's why I do this. I like the idea of a real print. I like the idea of hand processed. I like the idea that it's a one-step process, but with all those positives, the downside is it is a relatively difficult medium to master, this direct positive paper. It is very slow photographically in terms of sensitivity or speed, but also its spectral sensitivity, the spectrum of light that this paper is sensitive to, is really more like ultraviolet and blue. And the results that you might enjoy in the summertime with bright skies full of UV light might not be the same in the wintertime and in the darker times of the year. So of the 8 photographs, the 8 prints that we exposed, 5 of them came out okay. The first 2 were dramatically, they look like underexposed but also underdeveloped. The shadows were really not dark black, they were more like grays, and that was a used bottle of developer, which I ended up not using. I ended up opening a fresh bottle of liquid concentrate developer. So one of the lessons here is that you have to be consistent with your process. If you haven't done this in months and you've had chemicals sitting around and stuff like that, you have to understand your chemistry and be consistent with it. So so with that said, this photograph is the third one, the West Bank, I called it, photograph. And I like it. Let's focus here. Obviously the shadows in the foreground are way, way underexposed, but we have some nice sky detail. There's the Rio Grande and a little bit of the Sandia Mountains in the background, so I like that picture. The next one is the boat landing dock on the west side of the river, and it looks like you can see maybe a little bit of that concrete grid of the boat landing dock, a little bit of the water, some of the tree branches, the sky. Foreground is very much underexposed. So I did not pre-flash these pictures. This one was the forked tree, kind of like that. I kind of like these though. They're dark and moody. Really rich shadows. And the highlights aren't really blown. Now this one is interesting. This might have been the best photograph of the entire series. This was that double tree, second to the last image. I really like the foreground detail of the grasses there and the weeds, and then these 2 trees arching over, and the branches down there. And I think what I did with this photograph was the developer from this one was the same developer on the previous 2. I added just a little bit more fresh concentrate, so it was kind of a used developer. So the shadows didn't get quite as dark, and you notice the tone is a little bit more warm tone. So, but I think this was the best photo of the whole series. The last shot is real interesting. So what we have is, it looks like the film holder at one time got opened up and exposed to light. Maybe it wasn't sitting in the camera properly, but we do have, I'm going to trim off this part of the picture, but you do have the Sandia Mountains right here in the distance, the trees on the far side of the river. Here's the river all the way up to the foreground, and those shrubs, the reeds and all that on the other side there. So I really like that photograph. I'm going to just crop it like that, maybe even crop it to a square, because this side over here is so black. I'm just going to make it a square format image. I think that'll work pretty well. So the results are kind of what I've expected. I mean, I've worked with this enough to know that it is a difficult medium to master, and especially when the light is challenging, when you lose a lot of the UV light. One of the main problems with this whole process is that You're relying upon light meters, at least that's the way I meter it. Light meters are sensitive to the full spectrum of panchromatic film, from red all the way to blue, but the paper is only sensitive to blue and UV. So what your light meter says may not correspond to what the paper is going to see. So that's the challenge in this whole process. Well, I hope this was enlightening and hope you guys enjoyed this whole thing. It's always an adventure when you're shooting pinhole and paper direct positives or paper negatives. It's always a challenge, but it's fun. I really enjoy the process. So until next time, you guys have a great day.